I just wanted to throw out a few other things, which is regarding the Haredi world. I don't have all the data in front of me, but I understand that the average family who has let's say, a husband learning in Kollel, that the amount of money which is received from the government for that Avrech Kollel is quite small, and one by no means could survive on that amount. In other words, it's very much, they are very much dependent for the most part on other sources, whether it's the wife working or other sources of financing from other organizations, whatever that might be. So I'm not sure to what extent it's correct to see the Haredi world as being a welfare basket case at this point. There was a time, maybe it was 30 years ago, that they received a lot of money for each child, and if you had 8, 9 children, you could actually be surviving based on that money. Nowadays, I'm not sure if it's at all like that. That's one point I wanted to make. Another point was that to add on to a point I think that you were making, which is that in the same way that I don't know whether we have to look at this as being, in other words, in terms of the Zvulun Yissachar paradigm, I'm not sure that that's even a necessary paradigm. It could be looked at in a more democratic sense, that the majority of the population in Israel is either Haredi, religious, or traditional. We're part of the electorate as well. And if we democratically have come to the conclusion that we want Torah learning on whatever level to be financed because we consider this important for the Jewish people, so maybe that's legitimate. I'm not saying the other counter arguments are not also arguments, but I'm just saying this is another argument. In other words, it's not, well, you're forcing me, I'm forcing you to finance something. No, but maybe we as the Jewish people, the majority of us, are traditionally oriented, and that's what we feel like financing at this point. The way they're looking at it is though the Haredim have us or blackmailing us into this, but I think that's an extreme rendition of what's going on.
But the thing I would say about those points is, first of all, it's certainly true that the numbers matter here. It's also very complicated, I think, to add all of them up because of the aforementioned nature of the socialist system, like there are a lot of different baskets of benefits sloshing around and going in different ways that target different populations. And so exactly what a typical family budget looks like in that sector and how much of what makes it all work comes from income generated from a job in the private sector versus, for example, like having work. But if your job is that you're a mashgiach, you're a kosher supervision expert, so that basically, and this was something that obviously came up in the last government before this one, when Matan Kahana was trying to reform the standards of kashrut, in part, because if the rabbinate can use state power to create a monopoly on who decides what's kosher, and if then there also are people who are state functionaries who get assigned by whatever political parties in control of whatever agency, who can hand out state-funded jobs or whatever else to go around and make sure that people are actually keeping according to the rules of kosher supervision required by the state. Having a job where you work in the public sector in that way, that's different than receiving a stipend as an avrich in a kollel, but it is still kind of part of the same equation. So it can be quite complex. And like you mentioned also, like the children thing, the state pays everyone to have children here, which is a form of, very uniformly applied socialistic benefit that maybe made more of a difference before, and it depends on the exact amount. And but when you add all of those things up, I don't think that you could say it's entirely inaccurate to raise the question, okay, how much of this way of a society organizing itself, like a subset, a sector of society organizing itself, how much of that would have to change if the budget for spending in general on all sorts of things contracted hugely, right? Like who would be scrambling the most to rearrange their life if it were the case that the state of Israel were, not handing out as much in this form, either in terms of public sector jobs, spending as much on public sector jobs, or in terms of benefits of various kinds, or subsidies of various kinds. And I think it's hard to calculate that, but the question in principle is still there, because we fundamentally need to be asking, not, and this gets to your second point, not just do we all agree that this is something that we want to spend money on, but also why should the state be doing it, right? Because I think there the sort of Milton Friedman style or Hayek style libertarian argument is a very sensible one, meaning if it's the case that people want to spend their income on supporting great Torah study, why wouldn't they do that if you let them keep their income? Why is the first step that you should tax them, put it all in a pot, where a government functionary who has no idea the quality necessarily of the Torah being paid for with his tax money should be distributing it? Like I would love to, and do sometimes, but like I would love to support B'ezrat Hashem Torah study with part of my income, but I have very little visibility into the quality of the product that's being purchased with the part of my tax money that goes to that, even if it's a small amount of it. And there are a lot of things that are like that, also with kosher supervision, also with whatever else are the things that are like the organs of state power that at this point, there's all sorts of agency capture and all sorts of, crony capitalism, whatever of the sort that has been worked out, so that there are certain political parties that when they get their hands on the certain organs of state power, they know how to get benefits to their constituency. And that's not, as I was saying before, unique to Haredim. It's also true of all sorts of other kinds of political parties. And also it's what happens in politics in general when states have big pots of cash to hand out. But with the Haredi version of that, it becomes a bigger question about education. We could even just define it that way. Whether we're talking about universities, whether we're talking about a kollel that is somehow like getting some state money because that is just money going to education, whether we're talking about schools before you go to college, whatever, is the tax money being best spent because it was collected and put in a pot? And I think especially with the kollels, there's no sort of transparency. There's no sense in which I, as a taxpayer, can say, well, I really would like Torah that's being taught in these kollels to, express my contribution to supporting that. It goes through the hands of people in particular political parties that, play the role in distributing those budgets to the yeshivot or whatever. And that's how it works. And they get funded to do their thing. And also the, numerous faculty at Har Tzofim, who, as I said, are basically, in a sense, religious zealots of another ideological program that's aimed at undermining the foundations of the Jewish state. They also get to do their thing. And I also don't get to say, why is my tax money being spent on paying the salaries of such people? So a certain kind of, libertarian would just say, a lot of this stuff you can devolve back to the people, and they'll probably come up with better universities and better yeshivot than if you, make the government this sort of third party that's largely blind to the quality of the product that it's paying for in the usual case, no matter what that is. and use that as a way of supporting religious education and Torah study. It's not necessarily the best way of getting the best product.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.